Здравейте, колеги! Радвам се, че сте тук с нас, с мен, с Чарлз. Днес вебинарът е посветен на Developing Critical Thinking Skills Through Your Space. Надявам се, че ще бъде интересно, полезно за вас. Така че няма да отнемам повече от времето на Чарлз и давам думата на него. Hello, Charles. I'm
Hello.
giving you the word to introduce yourself.
So thank you very much. And let me welcome you all here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to share with us this webinar. So I've just shared my screen. If you can give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat, can you see my screen? Excellent. So as my colleague mentioned, my name is Charles Stewart, and I do work for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. My official title is a very long one. It's Professional Learning and Development Specialist. What I do, I travel around a very large region that's about a quarter of the world, of which Bulgaria is one of the countries, delivering workshops face-to-face, webinars online, and speaking at conferences on behalf of Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into the webinar this evening. So the webinar is all about critical thinking skills using the book MySpace. So what are we going to talk about in the webinar today? First of all, we're going to look a little bit at critical thinking. What is it? What makes up critical thinking? It's necessary for us to understand this before we then can talk about how we can use it in the classroom, how we can train it in the classroom using your Space coursebook. And once we establish what it is, we're also going to look at a couple of different types, branches of critical thinking skills, both lower order and higher order critical thinking skills. And then, based on our knowledge of what critical thinking is and the branches that make up critical thinking, we will then look at examples from the course book and discover a little bit of how we can train critical thinking skills in the classroom as we are also training both receptive and productive skills. So as you see, we've got quite a lot to cover in this hour. So first of all, critical thinking. What is critical thinking? What I would like for you to do on the screen, you see some definitions of critical thinking, but some of the words are hidden. Which of these words go in the gap? So, critical thinking is the ability to think. Which of these words is number one? Clearly, well done, and rationally, excellent. It includes the ability to engage in what and what thinking. It is, in fact, reflective and independent thinking. So when we look at critical thinking is more than just the gathering of information. Yes, that is part of critical thinking because it is necessary for us to take what we are given, whether it's verbally or in written words. It's critical for us to take this information in and make sense of it, sort it out somehow. But it goes a step further than that. And it allows us the ability to engage in both reflective and independent thinking. So therefore, when I was preparing this webinar, this quote I think is very, very applicable. This quote was written in the book Thinking in the Classroom, and it says, critical thinking is the ability to analyze facts, generate and organize ideas, defend positions or defend opinions, make comparisons, draw inferences, evaluate arguments, and solve problems. So we can see here critical thinking itself is very vast. There's a lot of different aspects that make up critical thinking. Critical thinking is taking in the information, taking in the facts, making sure that we understand them, but then taking those facts and analyzing them, making sense out of them, drawing inferences, evaluating, solving problems. And because of this, there are two different branches, so to speak, of critical thinking skills. We have lower order critical thinking skills and higher order critical thinking skills. What I would like for you to do, take 30 seconds, walk through this diagram and read all of the things that are involved in both lower order and higher order critical thinking skills. Okay, so based on this chart, let's focus first on the lower order critical thinking skills. Apply, understand, and remember. My question for you is, what are lower order critical thinking skills? What does this mean? What does it involve? So with lower order critical thinking skills, this involves simply the gathering of information, the processing of information so that we understand it. Now, critical thinking does not stop there, though, because as we see with the higher order critical thinking skills, it's not enough just to take in the information, because true critical thinking involves the analysis of the information, the evaluation of the information, and using it somehow to create something new. So we can see here with higher order critical thinking skills, higher order is on a level that is higher than just simply memorization. It's on a different level, on a much higher level than simply me telling back to you what you just told to me. It involves us taking the facts and doing something with these facts. Now, with critical thinking, it is essential in the classroom that as we're developing our students' critical thinking skills, that we are developing both the lower order critical thinking skills. This would involve things like gathering information, analyzing the information, perhaps putting it into a mind map or a concept map in order to sort the facts. But then we also need to be training the higher order critical thinking skills as well, encouraging them based on, for example, what they read in a text, for them to take it and to answer follow-up questions about it, gathering the information, but then using it in a way that they have to analyze it or form opinions about it or express judgments about it or recommendations. Now, this is quite a tall order for us to do all of these things in the classroom in order to truly train our critical thinking skills and truly train our learners how to think critically. So Cambridge has some help for you. So Cambridge has developed something that is called the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework. In the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework, this deals with things such as collaboration, creativity, learner autonomy, communication, and critical thinking. And Cambridge has developed free booklets. I will give you the link to them at the end of the presentation today, where you can download, read about critical thinking skills, further analyze both the lower order and higher order critical thinking skills, and then see exactly how we can use it in the classroom. So if we look at the critical thinking specifically for secondary learners, this chart is an example of the core areas that make up critical thinking. We have understanding and analyzing ideas and arguments, evaluating ideas and arguments, and solving problems and decision making. For each of these core areas, as you can see on the screen, they're also broken down further. So understanding and analyzing ideas is broken down into identifying and classifying information, recognizing patterns in relationships, and interpreting and drawing inferences from arguments and data. Complete with can-do statements. These also align to the CEFR as well, and example language of how learners can demonstrate and use it in conversation that they are indeed practicing the core area. So as I said, I will give you the link to download these at the end of the session today. Do have a look at them. There are some really useful facts and further analysis of exactly what makes up critical thinking. Okay, so now that we have briefly spoken about what critical thinking is, let's look at your space. Let's look at some examples from the various levels of the course book and to think about using the course book materials, how we can also encourage both lower order and higher order critical thinking skills in the classroom. So in the classroom, we teach skills. What are the 4 skills that we teach in the chat? Absolutely, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Now, with these skills are broken down into receptive skills and productive skills. Now, receptive skills are usually the first language skills to be developed. The productive skills are usually developed after the receptive. Which of these 4 skills would be receptive skills? Absolutely, listening and reading, because both listening and reading involve language input. You're gathering the information, you're developing the ability to understand, and usually listening and reading are relatively easy skills to develop in the classroom. Even weaker students or students that are a bit shyer in the classroom typically respond very well to receptive skills. Now, with productive skills, which of these 4 skills are productive skills? Absolutely. Someone wrote writing and speaking is the other one, which are a bit harder for some students, especially speaking. Absolutely. Because with productive skills of writing and speaking, it's not language input, it's language output. Therefore, this is the ability to truly communicate. We know that simply listening and reading is not enough. Yes, we get the information, but we also need to demonstrate that we have in fact understood, for example, the present perfect in the classroom. Therefore, because of this, productive skills are a bit more difficult and challenging to develop than receptive skills. So let's look at a few strategies for both receptive and productive skills that include critical thinking. So strategy 1, we're going to be looking at the receptive skill of reading and the productive skill of both speaking and writing. So for this is going to be the basis for the first strategy. I want you to take a look at this page. This page comes from Your Space Level 1, Unit 6. And I want you to reflect, first of all, imagine that you're teaching this in the classroom. How would you teach this? Think about it for a few seconds, and then if you could share in the chat, what are some different things that you could do with this page in the classroom? So getting them to describe the photos, absolutely. Someone said, what I usually do when it comes to this text is I let them read it alone for 5 to 6 minutes. Then I give them out roles, who is to read it and engage with them. So kind of like a role play. Someone else wrote role play, exactly. Okay, now With this page, how could you include critical thinking skills? Remember, critical thinking skills are both lower order, the gathering of information, and higher order, which is making sense of the information and reacting to it. So perhaps elicit the rules in our own classroom and then compare them to the text. Good. Any other ideas of how we could include critical thinking skills? Okay, so for me, if I were doing this page in the classroom, I would probably employ a technique called dialogic reading. Now, that is a very fancy name, a very formal name. Basically, what this is as we're reading the text, I'm having a dialogue with the students. I'm talking to them about the text, asking them questions about the text. I have found in my own experience in the classroom, so a little bit of my background, I've been in education now for 15, 16 years, something like this, as an English teacher in both the public schools and also in private language schools as well. And one of the things that I've found about dialogic reading and this dialogue with students through the text is there are a lot of benefits to it. It creates memorable and interactive lessons. You're engaging with the students. You're asking them questions about what they've read, but in doing so, you can very easily delve into critical thinking skills as well. So, how would I do this? Okay, on the screen, there are some sentences. In the chat, the first sentence, you must blank the lesson. Imagine that you are a student. Fill in this gap with a rule for the classroom or the school. You must blank the lesson. You must learn the lesson. Yes, good. Follow the lesson. Pay attention to the lesson. Good. Enjoy the lesson. Oh, I like that one. Okay, what about the second sentence? You mustn't blank at school. You mustn't run at school. Good. Definitely don't want any accidents in the corridor. You mustn't smoke at school. Absolutely. Until they're 18. You mustn't argue at school. That's a good one. Sleep. Okay. The third sentence. I mustn't blank. I mustn't smoke. Yes. I mustn't fight. That's a good one. Bullying is not allowed. I mustn't scream. I mustn't talk back to the teachers. Absolutely. Okay, last one, the fourth one. Students have to respect the teachers, do their best, follow the rules, be quiet, wear uniforms. Absolutely good. Okay, now my question is, if I were doing this page, I would have my students do something like this. Would I have them do it before or after the reading? Absolutely. I would have them to do it before. So what I would do with this page, I would give my learners something like this that they would fill in the gap. They could work alone, they could work with a partner, and they would need to fill in the gap with something. And then the task would be, sorry about that, the task would be then to read the text and compare their answers to the answers that are given in the text. So here, what I'm doing, I'm bringing in grammar into the reading. We're talking about grammar. We're focusing on here must, mustn't, has to, and doesn't have to. Therefore, I'm eliciting from them, and then I'm getting them to compare it with their own lesson. I would extend this activity to delve into something dealing with critical thinking skills. So my question is for you now, after the reading, how can I extend this activity to include critical thinking skills? So referring back to the life competencies framework for critical thinking, I would want to do something from this bottom one here, solving problems and making decisions. And I would focus in specifically on recommendations, evaluating opinions and recommendations to come to a decision. So something like the problem with blank is that dot, dot, dot. This would be the target language that I would want them to use to express their understanding of critical thinking skills. Now, the way that I would do that is through an activity that's called time to create some problems. So we can see here, what is the name of this kind of diagram where you have something in the middle and then circles around it? Absolutely. There are several different names for it, a mind map, a concept map. Sometimes people even call it a spider diagram because it looks like a spider. And what I would have them to do would involve a problem and solutions. So let's look at these rules. Students have to wear school uniforms all the time. This is the rule. What are some possible problems with this rule in the chat? Okay, they don't like the uniform. Loss of identity. Oh, I like that one. Okay, let's take loss of identity. That's the problem. So they would write loss of identity here. What are some possible solutions to this? Variety of different uniforms. That would be a good one. Maybe the school could have 4 or 5 different uniforms, different colors perhaps. Someone wrote accessories. Yeah. Different badges for each class, and perhaps the classes could make their own badge, and then everyone would need to use it. Okay, let's look at one other problem. Let's say students have to listen to the teachers. What are some problems with that? Sometimes it's boring, lack of attention, good. So boredom is the theme that I'm seeing here. So boredom would go here. What are some possible solutions to this? Someone wrote have to is the problem. Absolutely. Variety, yeah. So perhaps the teachers could use a variety of things in their lessons of different types of things. Working in teams, I like that one, absolutely. So this activity comes from the Cambridge Life Competencies, actually. And in the Cambridge Life Competencies framework, not only are there the booklets that explain exactly what it is, but there are a set of activity cards as well. And in these activity cards, it has various ready-made activities that you can pull from. And then whilst you're doing it, train critical thinking skills. Now, some other options for this, where we're dealing with problems, would be write a list of solutions, which is what we did. The students could then, with their problem and their solutions, write a short supportive message supporting the students. They're writing it to a fellow student who's having a problem with this. Perhaps put it in an email. Have them to discuss it, role play with their friend as well. Send a voice message. So having them to record their voice and sending it to someone else. So you can see here, there's many different ways that we can do this, but in taking this activity and extending it, we're covering and training both lower order critical thinking skills through the sentences, the gap fill, where they're looking at the information, they're processing the information to make sure that they understand it. But then we're going a step further and saying, right, given this information, what are some problems with it? What are some workaround solutions for these problems? So we're getting them to think on a higher level using the information that they've gathered. And when this happens, it creates a dialogue between the teacher and student in the reading activity. And more than that, it helps to train our learners to think more critically. Okay, so let's look now at strategy two. So, strategy two involves speaking and writing, the productive skills, and the receptive skill of reading. Okay, much like the first strategy, this will be the basis of our second strategy. So, once again, take a few seconds. Imagine this is what you are teaching in the classroom. In the chat, what are some different things that you could do with this in the lesson? Predicting, good. Having a discussion, that's a very good thing to do. Okay, now this is what I'm teaching in the lesson. How can I include critical thinking skills? Just simply think, nothing in the chat. So once again, referring back to the life competency framework. Here, we're going to be focusing on understanding and analyzing ideas and arguments, and more specifically, interpreting and drawing inferences from arguments and data. The language he really thinks or she really thinks. So, building on from that, the first thing that I would do would be pull out the pictures. There are a million different things that you can do with pictures in the classroom. So with these, the first picture here. In the chat, what do you see in the picture? Footprints or animal tracks? Yes. Emotions? Absolutely. The look on their faces. A long path? Yes. Imagine that I was there with them and I took this picture. What do you think happened just before I took the picture? So they went out of the forest, they heard something. Okay, I took the picture. Now, what happens just after I took the picture? So I followed them. Okay, followed the prints somewhere. They ran exactly. Okay, now, fast forward 10 minutes. I took this picture. What do you see in the picture? A frozen lake. Excellent. They saw Bigfoot. Oh, a wooden hut, a cabin. Yes. Okay, now I took this picture. What happened just before I took this picture? What happened just before I took this picture? So they saw the cabin and they were very happy because they had shelter. We saw a winter area around the lake. Yes. Okay. I took this picture now. What happens just after this picture? Someone wrote, they're saved. Absolutely. I was thinking the same thing. Take a look at the hut or the cabin. Big discussion of what to do exactly. What are some options of what they can do? Go inside, find a friend and play a prank? Absolutely. Maybe jump out and scare someone. That would be fun. So this activity where we're looking at pictures before we do a reading also comes from the Life Competencies Framework training critical thinking skills. Here, we're looking at the visual input. We're talking about what we see in the picture, lower order critical thinking skills. And then based on what we see, we're making opinions, drawing arguments, perhaps inferring data based on what we see, thus higher order critical thinking skills. When you look at effective critical thinking skills training in the classroom, the activity will have both higher and lower order critical thinking skills being trained one after the other. Now, from here, after we discuss the pictures, before we do the reading, I would then do another activity before I did the reading as well, and that involves the WH prompts. Who, what, where, when, and why. 5 WH question words. So what I would like for you to do, in the chat, I would like for you to write questions that you have. These are the pictures from the story. Write some questions using a different WH word. So, for example, who are they? Okay, so after my students have each written 5 questions, one question with who, one with what, where, when, and why, then I would give them the reading task. And I would ask them, so read the story and answer your questions. If your question isn't answered, circle it. And then I would give them time to read it and either answer their questions or circle them. And then I would come back together as a class and have a discussion about it. How many of your questions were answered? How many of them were unanswered? Give me some questions that were answered. Give me some questions that were unanswered. So here, once again, we're training critical thinking skills. Here, lower order critical thinking skills. But then through the discussion at the end, how many questions were unanswered? What are some of your unanswered questions? Let's speculate on it. What do you think the answer would be based on what you read? Thus, simultaneously training both lower and higher order critical thinking skills as well. And then, after we answer the questions and discuss them, I would get them to fill in something like this. In the chat, what is this activity called? Close. Someone wrote storyline. Yeah, it's actually called a storyboard. Basically, what a storyboard is it is putting organization to what happens or bits and pieces, details from a story. So here, I would display this in the classroom after they have read it, after we've discussed the questions that they wrote. I would display this and say, right, so with a partner, I want you to fill in all 4 of these squares. So here, even though I wrote character, setting, plot, theme, I would still have these in the classroom. Someone wrote in the chat here they might need an explanation in L1. Rather than giving an explanation in L1, I would recommend, and what I normally do in my classes with a storyboard, is I go through each one. Characters, what does this mean? The characters are the people in a story. The setting, what does this mean? This is the place that the story happened. And walk through each one just to make sure that they understand it before they fill it in either alone or even better with a partner. And I would have them to do this with a partner and then 2 groups come together, compare your storyboards. Are they similar or are they different? You could also, rather than doing this alone, you could even do it as a class where you're eliciting the information from them together, and then the class together on the whiteboard or on the board are filling in the boxes of the story, thus making the storyboard. This is a very, very useful activity for training critical thinking skills because here, lower order critical thinking skills are about the gathering and the processing of information to make sure that we understand it. Therefore, the more that we can use things like graphic organizers, which we'll see some more here in just a minute, the more that we can train our students on how to use graphic organizers, the easier it will be for them to process large amounts of information because they know exactly how to do it in using graphic organizers. Now, the third and the last strategy that we will look at involves the productive skills of speaking and writing and the receptive skill of reading. Okay, last time, here's a page. This extract comes from Your Space Level 2, Unit 10. Here, great mysteries, Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, someone who wrote Bigfoot in the chat will be happy, UFOs, and Atlantis. what can we do with this page? If this is what you're teaching in your class, what can you do with it? Someone wrote creating stories and then seeing how close they are to the real one. Yeah. Do you believe in mysteries? That sounds like a really good discussion starter. And then perhaps, do you believe in them? Yeah. And why you believe in them? Absolutely discussion. I think that this lesson in particular, this spread, really, really lends itself very well to having a great discussion with your class. So, my next question is, how can you train critical thinking skills with this? Definitely graphic organizers or visual organizers. So for these, basically what graphic organizers are is something like a concept map or a spider diagram where we're sorting information. You could, for example, give them Bigfoot here, and then they have to write some ideas about Bigfoot, some facts about it, or UFOs, Atlantis. But you could also do something like this. What is this diagram called? This is a concept map or spider diagram. This is called a what? This is called a Venn diagram. Basically, what Venn diagrams are two circles or two ovals like we see here on the screen. Here, you write facts about something. Here, what I think, what my partner thinks. But then the area that overlaps is the common component of both of them. So what I think, what my partner thinks, what we both think. Now, I would actually, for this activity, lend something like this to my learners. Imagine you're planning to solve a mystery. What are two of these mysteries that you think would be interesting in solving? In the chat, Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, UFOs, or Atlantis? For me, I would say probably UFOs would be the most interesting. I'm a huge science fiction fan, and so definitely UFOs would be my cup of tea. So what I would have my learners to do is I would have them each to pick one, and they have to research it. They have to read here, perhaps give them some time as well on their mobile phones if you're allowed to use mobiles in the classroom. Perhaps if you cannot use mobiles in the classroom, you can print out some pages from simplified Wikipedia. So there are two versions of Wikipedia, the regular version and one that is in simplified English. Google it, it's great for lower level learners. You could easily print out one page from the simplified Wikipedia, and they have to fill in facts. And then I put them with a partner who has a different mystery to solve. And I would ask them to create one of these for their group. Some facts about Bigfoot, some facts about UFOs. What is different? Is there anything similar between the two mysteries? So here they're looking at the information, they're learning how to sort it, and in doing so, they're learning what's different, but also what is similar between the mysteries as well. And then after they compare the two, the team, the pair, have to choose one of them and try to solve the mystery, where they can analyze the facts after they have gotten the information and sorted it, discussed it, going up to higher order critical thinking skills and what they think the mystery actually is in reality, how they could solve it. Did Atlantis actually exist? If so, where do they think it is? What do they think happened to it? UFOs, was it actually aliens? If so, where do they think the aliens can come from? How often do they visit the Earth? Therefore, we're going up to higher order critical thinking skills with this activity as well. Now, an additional activity that I would have them to do would be something with evaluating ideas and arguments. So here, how can you prove it? I think it's true because, and in summary. From here, they would then present their solved mystery to the class, doing a mini presentation. If you don't want them to do it to the class, you could put them in groups where three pairs are together, so groups of six, and they have to present it to their group using this language. Now, another idea that I will give you for this particular strategy using these receptive and productive skills would be distancing prompts. What this is are leading questions that are asked by you that help them to reflect on a topic using their own experiences. Here, your goal is to create a bridge between the text and the real world to the learner. For example, what would you have done if you got this call? How would you feel if you were the main character? So we can see two different example questions, one for a higher level class, one for a lower level class. Yet in both of them, we're bridging the story and the real life of the learners. So how does this work? This picture, Atlantic Wonder Boy, distancing prompts. 14-year-old Michael sailed around the Atlantic. If you had to prepare for this trip, what would you do first? What kind of advice could Michael give someone who would do this same trip? So these questions in the chat, before or after the reading? Absolutely after. So after they have read about Michael's trip across the Atlantic, they then have to take the information that they've gathered, bridge the story to their own experience, and answer the question, what would you do first if you were going on this trip? What advice do you think that Michael could give someone doing this same trip? So imagine I am talking to Michael. What would he say to me? I want to do this trip. Therefore, once again, we're using discussion, the productive skill of speaking, to enhance the receptive skill of reading. And in doing so, we're training both higher and lower order critical thinking skills through one activity. Someone wrote in the chat, this text was one of their favorites. Absolutely. This text is a great, great story. At the bottom, I mistakenly said it's from Own It. It's actually from, I believe it's level 3 of your space. But it's really a wonderful, wonderful story. And by adding distancing prompts, we can make sure through the reading that we're getting in the critical thinking skills, and encouraging our learners to go a step past just simply taking in the information, make sure that they're actually analyzing it and doing something new with it. So with that being said, we have spoken about quite a lot in the session today. First of all, we looked at what critical thinking skills are, analyzed both higher order and lower order critical thinking skills, and looked at 3 strategies for helping enhance receptive and productive skills by adding that extra aspect of critical thinking. Critical thinking is so important for us to train with our learners. In the world today, we need more critical thinkers. Therefore, make sure in your lessons that you're going that extra step and enhancing the 4 skills by adding that crucial component of critical thinking. And once again, thank you very much for coming to the session today. Thank you, Klett, for hosting the session today. And I look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar.
Thank you, Charles. It was
Thank you.
wonderful. And I hope that everybody was really filled with energy with what you have presented. So thank you all for coming, and see you soon.